selling, or they love writing code, or they love being a researcher, or they love doing marketing. Often being a great leader in those areas means you don't do as much of that. You get joy out of seeing your team do that at scale and do it well. And I always tell people, it doesn't mean you have to be a leader.
Welcome to UX Ignite. I chat with industry leaders. Uncover user experience knowledge with your host, Kuldeep Kelkar, your partner for all things user research.
Today we have a special guest. Welcome, Andy.
Hey, Kuldeep. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. So rather than me introducing you, why don't you walk us through your journey? Now, you have been a CEO for UserTesting for almost 5-6 years, I believe, right? And so
about 6 years now. Yeah.
You've seen this UX market up close, but you came through the product side of the house, and I heard you in the past talk about your product experiences, and so you've been close to the entire product development. And so tell our audience your journey all the way to the CEO of UserTesting.
Certainly. I actually started my career as a Java developer. So a very, very long time ago, I started as a consultant. So I worked for EDS, which is one of the big, outsourcing IT shops in the world. And so I actually went out and worked with customers to build custom products and custom solutions with mostly Java at the time. And got into early web development on General Motors websites. So my customer at EDS was General Motors. We worked on the early days of Chevrolet.com and Pontiac.com and things like that. Ended up doing an MBA at the University of Edinburgh. And after getting my MBA, took a job at a small software product company called Stellent, which was in the web content management space. Stellent was eventually purchased by Oracle a couple of years later. And that's where I found my way into product management. So started working as a product manager, came up a little bit through the ranks at Oracle, decided cloud was a really big emerging opportunity. And so I took a job as a product leader at Salesforce, running a product line called data.com, ended up becoming the general manager of that product line. And from there, thought being a CEO sounded like a fun thing to go do. And as being a GM was sort of like being a CEO. You had a sales team and everything like that. So first, went over to Acton Software in the marketing automation space. And for a couple of years, came over to UserTesting. And as you said, it's been kind of 6 amazing years to this point at UserTesting.
Wow. I guess in general, the UX audience have known UserTesting for a few years. But tell us a little bit. I know people are interested in hearing sometimes directly from the CEO. What do you think about what does UserTesting do, and how can people use UserTesting?
I still think the whole space around experience research, getting feedback from real users, sort of as you go through the process of building something, I think is still in its early stages. I tell the story all the time. When I first met Daryl, the founder of UserTesting, I met him through a mutual friend. And I knew almost nothing about user testing, and I'd been in product management for, a decade. And Daryl describes to me what the product does, and it felt sort of painfully obvious and at the same time sort of embarrassing of like, okay, I've been building all these products. I have not been getting my users involved and understanding their actual needs. As a product manager, I'd go out and talk to some customers, but not systematically, not the way that a platform like UserTesting can really help people do that. And so that's what initially got me very interested in it. My point of view now, after being in the company for half a decade, is I still think the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge facing our space is how to take something that I think is really valuable at every point in the product development process, probably also in the e-commerce process, probably also in the marketing process if you're building collateral and content and running marketing campaigns, and turning it into something that the process can make part of every time you're launching something. I still think UX research, usability, testing, even focus group kind of feedback, to me is still done one-off. It's still done on a project basis. I think it's often still viewed as being sort of expensive and time-consuming. And I think too often it's viewed as a luxury that people sometimes just don't have time for. So they guess and they hope for the best. And my overall thesis is that I think the technology that user testing and user Zoom and others have brought to bear on the market has changed that cost curve so dramatically that, it costs pennies on the dollar to what it used to cost to get user feedback, yet people still act like it costs dollars, not pennies. And so, how do we rethink our ability to get feedback really fast and throughout the process in a high quality way? And I think that's a big shift, and that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, pretty exciting. I mean, and full disclaimer, I asked that question in an innocent way, but disclaimer is that I worked at UserZoom, user testing for almost 8 years. So I know a thing or two, and certainly I've known Andy for the last couple of years or so. And Andy, you're absolutely right. So almost 20 years ago, when we used to do a lot of research at PayPal, the assumption was that an individual researcher might be able to execute 10 studies a year. Now we know that there are customers that run 10 studies, or individuals that run 10 studies a month. And then so that's a I might be exaggerating a little bit, but that's a 10x improvement in productivity, long before AI or machine learning or any of that even kicks in, right? And so absolutely agreed.
Yeah, and I would almost continue to push on that thesis. I mean, with I'd say three main improvements, which have taken time to sort of all come together. One is the ability to templatize and make smarter the way that we ask questions of our users. Yeah. So over time, we've gone from that being an area of raw expertise. If you wanted to go do some user testing, you had to know how to go do that. The ability to solicit feedback from people. And so again, that's something that, 10 years ago meant you had to, send out mailers or, go stand by, a shopping mall and ask people they'd participate in your study. And then you had to bring them into a lab, compensate them for their time, right? And so the act of actually soliciting the feedback. And then being able to go through and analyze all that feedback. And so you're right. While it might have been something people did 10 a year and it's gone to 10 a month, I would posit that right now, using technology, people could essentially do an infinite amount in a day. You could do 10 studies in a day if that's what your product team needed done. With our ability to templatize, going out and getting the feedback, our ability to use technology to go get that feedback. I mean, the vast majority of the feedback on our platform today comes back in a few hours. Sometimes it can be minutes. You can be getting feedback in 20 or 30 minutes. And now, and I'm sure we'll talk about this because it's sort of the big topic du jour in tech, but now with our AI insight summaries, you can actually extract the value out of all that research right away as well. So I can launch multiple studies simultaneously. We can go and collect all that feedback at the same time, and then I can get insights back from that a researcher can now say, okay, where do I want to dive deep and spend time? And I think that's where, researchers are going to turn into this amazing superhero that can sort of zoom across all this feedback. But they're not restricted by the cost and time of going and collecting that feedback. Something that used to take, and I've used this example many times before publicly when I was at Salesforce, we spent a couple $100,000 to do a usability study. And it took 4 or 5 months. And when it came back, I got a PDF of their findings. Right. And we'd already changed the product a bunch since then. So it was sort of outdated by the time I got it. That thing that took a couple $100,000, I could have done that on user testing in a few hours. And I could have disseminated all that out to my team. We could have been making decisions. And I could have done it for a whole lot less money. And so that's what I mean by sort of when you bend that cost curve, you start to ask yourself, well, why am I not testing all my ideas? Why am I not testing all my designs? Why am I not testing all my early prototypes? Why am I not testing all of my betas this way? And all that cost saving starts to shift because I can start to discover problems in the design phase and the ideation phase. But I can do all of that because something that used to be bespoke and expensive and specialized is now a whole lot cheaper and faster and actually better in quality because we're empowering our typical user, an experienced researcher, to basically set up and run that process. They can set up those templates. They can set up the audiences. They can look across all the insights that are being created. We're not really just intermediating them. We're kind of empowering them. But it can be done, in parallel.
Agreed. Yeah. So speaking of AI, right, I mean, AI is the talk of town, machine learning, and there is certainly on LinkedIn people that are genuinely excited with all the productivity gains and what machine learning or ChatGPT in specific, now Copilot or Google Gemini, the rebrand from Bard can do. But there's also fear. And there's a whole lot of, it's like, oh, gee, what is going to happen within a year or two? Your thoughts on the topic of AI in general and how it applies to user research?
I think in general, all those feelings are valid. I don't know every place in the world where AI is going to either create jobs or in some cases consume jobs, right? I mean, we've seen this every time there's a big advancement in technology. One area that job changes a ton and maybe sort of gets absorbed into technology, and then other jobs emerge that sort of work with that technology. I think for user research in particular, to our previous point, I would say right now we are doing less than 1% of the required research that I think needs to be being done in the world. I mean, how many things go from idea to design without getting user tested? And I would argue all those things should get user tested. And how many of these go from design to build and we don't user test them? And again, I would argue all those things should be getting user tested, and not just user tested with your main audience, but think about the long tail of audiences that lack representation in your testing. So if you start to think about the surface area of all the things we're not testing, and then all the people we're not testing with, that surface area is enormous. I mean, absolutely enormous. And I would say everything you build, everything in your live site, you should be testing your competitors' experiences. You probably want to be testing the experiences around your experience, right? People don't just land in your app. They download it from an app store. What's that like? They search for you in Google, or they're using, Expedia. If you're an airline, like there's all these things you should be getting feedback on. And so if we take a step back and say, why aren't all of those things being tested all of the time with all of our audiences? And I think the reason is the limiting factor has been, if we're talking about doing maybe like a moderated conversation with a bespoke set of participants you had to find by hand, the reason is that takes too much time. You can't slow the whole business down to do that. If we flip that around and said, what if we bring technology to bear on this problem? Even if AI made every researcher 10, 50 times more productive, I would argue to cover that surface area we just talked about, we probably have to hire more researchers. And so I think the opportunity for our whole industry is to put our hands up and say, we're willing to put ourselves in every one of those steps in the process. I don't think we've historically been willing to do that because we couldn't answer all the demand and we couldn't be fast enough. But if we said, look, with an AI-assisted team, yes, we could help our product organizations or our marketing teams test every concept, every design, every build, every beta, every product, every experience. I just need a few more people on my team. I think you'd get that headcount, right? I mean, so I think that's got to be the mindset, which is that our opportunity today is such an aspirational opportunity to go get, that I think there's a lot of room for all of us to sort of use AI to help capture more of that opportunity. I think it would be different if we were saying, hey, I'm a team that, is the limiting factor. I'm already overstaffed. Now AI is going to come in and drive down productivity, drive up productivity and drive down headcount requirements. Like, I don't think we're anywhere near that point in time for our industry. I think we're sort of looking at it as an opportunity to finally say, hey, this aspiration we have of being in the middle of every project and every idea, maybe AI helps us actually do that.
Yeah, wow. I'm still envisioning the only 1% of all software that is being written probably goes through some sort of a feedback cycle. The other 99%, whatever the percentage might be, 90%, 95%, 99%, there's no easy way of actually measuring it that I know of. But it in the last 25 years, I 100% agree that a very significant high percentage of software is going out into the market, and then there is a surprise element. Gee, the end users liked it, didn't like it. There is anxiety, there's nail biting. All of that risk reduction can be done through this iterative testing over the entire product development lifecycle. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Or even change some of the assumptions we make about how we do that work.
Yeah.
So when you talk about how much of it goes through a user test, also think about how much of it goes through a pretty narrow set of usability testing. Are you testing with every one of your audiences? Are you testing with people that have different accessibility needs? Are you testing with people that are underrepresented, but you would love to start seeing their usage grow in your app? So let me give you a really pointed one. In our industry, we have for years, and user testing as well, talked about this magic number of 5 people, right? That I could get 5 people to go through an experience. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. But if we say, why is it 5? And I think the reason it's 5 is because if we go back to before we used technology to change the cost basis of doing this, if I needed 5 people to come into my lab for a day, and I had to have a team of people working with them, and all this expensive equipment, and capturing all of this, and then a whole team of people to analyze all the results, you start to say, well, where do I start to get diminishing returns? Where it's really expensive. Each one of these, is it worth all the money and expense and time and effort to have a 6th participant, a 7th participant? So I understand why it's 5. 5 is the point where historically, for those of you that don't spend all day at UX research, we're talking about number of participants you need when doing a usability study. There's a lot of research that says 5 people start to give you an indication of the usability of a product and with a lot of certainty. But I would argue, if that cost curve was down from, again, dollars to pennies per participant, right? If you change entirely what it costs you to go get that, why not test with 100 people? Why not test with people with different accessibility needs? Why not test with a much larger sample set? Because again, you could use tools like AI to analyze all those results. You could use tools like user testing to go find those 100 people in a snap, right? Yeah. And so again, I go back to like, not only is it where we're testing, but it's how we're testing. So imagine now you're the head of research at a large company and you could say, hey, at every one of these steps in the process, I could enable our team to get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people to give us real trends and understanding of all kinds of different users and their needs. And using AI, I can bring that to bear very quickly to the organization. I think will change not only where people test, but also how they test and who they test with. And I think that's a big opportunity again for things like underrepresented groups, people with different accessibility needs. A lot of people would love to get that feedback, but they just haven't thought about ways to do that in a way that honestly, like they can make the business justification. And I think we've reached a point where we can say yes to that. Like, yeah, we can solve that problem.
Super exciting to hear, and you speak, Andy, because not only is that only 1 to 5% of software is being tested, so there's another green field of 90, 95, 99%, but there's also the dimensionality of different types of users. There's the dimensionality of higher sample size. There's potentially the dimensionality of multiple different research methods. You don't have to use just one method. And so there's 4 dimensions that this can grow in. So I'm not sure why we should be worried about somebody taking user researcher's job.
Yeah, I think the job, like a lot of jobs over time, changes a little bit. Yeah. So maybe your job, and it's fun part of the job, isn't just interviewing participants. It may be setting up an entire infrastructure where you're getting tons of interviews solicited all kinds of different ways. And what you're doing is saying, hey, when we run into a really big problem, then I step in and I might interview some participants, right? But you think of it like if you instrumented the whole process the way we've been describing, where at every step in the process, you're getting all this feedback from lots of different audiences. Now your job as a researcher could sort of be, well, where do I find the sticky problems that we're not able to sort of get a great design in place? And now I'm going to dive in and spend some time with some people and really understand how to solve that problem. Again, we talk about funding, how these teams get funded. If I was the chief product officer, that sounds pretty valuable. Okay, great. I've got a team of specialists that are diving into my stickiest, hardest product problem areas, working with users and discovering how we can solve problems in partnership with my design team. Great. That is entirely different than saying I've got a team that in some of the projects, some of the time, does some work that takes a while, that sometimes my product does something with. That's riskier, right? And so that's the opportunity.
You're now touching on an area where in so many of my conversations with design leaders, be it research leaders or individual contributors who are engaging in these types of conversations with their product counterparts or engineering counterparts or marketing counterparts. And the one thing that I hear almost every single time is, and I do a lot of my mentorship sessions with a lot of people across the industry. The most common question that I get is, hey, I want to influence someone. That someone might be a product leader, that someone might be a technology leader. And so my follow-up question, which is, why do you want to influence? Hey, we want to conduct more research, or we want more increased funding, or I want to hire more people, or want to protect our team size, or whatever the reason might be. The community in general wants to influence stakeholders. And the community in general struggles to figure out how to do this. So my question here is do you have any recommendations? Have you heard about this? How should UXers think of when it comes to influence budget holders, get more funding, demonstrate more value? Your general thoughts on this topic?
I think it's a really great question. I think there's a couple pieces to it. I think there's generally a big push right now of how do we as researchers speak to business value. I think that's worthwhile, but I think sometimes a little bit too narrow in its scope. So yes, it's great if you can go to your chief product officer and say, hey, we ran this amazing study. We learned why, people weren't signing up. We made a change, and that's going to drive, $30 million in additional value. The challenge with that is if you're the chief product officer and then next week that group comes and asks for some funding, I already got the 30. I mean, you told me the thing, like that's been solved, right? So what do I get next, right? And that's where I think shifting to talking about how we impact the process, how things are built. If you go to a chief product officer, and we're actually doing this with a couple companies now, I think it's really interesting. Some really large software companies, actually, they're starting to prioritize which designs they're going to spend time building based on feedback they're getting from users going through user testing. And so now as a chief product officer, basically what I'm saying is I'm only going to spend my limited development resources on the winners, the things that people want me to build. And I'm going to do that every time. So now you're changing the process. You're going to a chief product officer and you're saying, hey, developers are a limited resource. How do you prioritize what you want them spending their time on? How do you not spend millions of dollars building the wrong thing only to find out that people didn't end up liking it? Not this release, not one example, every single release. And so I think one of the things, again, we were talking about earlier, when this is viewed as being expensive, custom, bespoke, and takes a lot of time, I know that we all feel like, well, it's still worth it, right? Most people that are a UXer, they say, well, that's worth it. Like, you should do that, right? We believe that in all of our soul. The problem is your chief product officer and your CTO are getting pushed by their CEO to ship something, right? To get product out the door. And we hear this all the time. People say, well, they're not willing to spend the time to do the research. And I would say we got to change that conversation. We have to say, we're going to put a research capability in place that is every bit as fast and agile as you need. And most importantly, it's going to help you not spend all this time building the wrong thing. That's really expensive. It's really expensive to build, a multi-million-dollar project initiative that, doesn't really move the needle. It's only slightly better than the last version, right? What if we could stay in the design phase, iterate a little bit more, and then build the right thing? If I'm at that chief product officer or CTO, I'm listening to that because now you're talking about changing how I build stuff. And so I think that's our big opportunity. Let's start talking to stakeholders about how we can always be on, always be testing, always be giving them data and feedback and insights so they can make decisions on an ongoing basis. We love to talk about individual projects in our world. And the hard part is they're always in the past, right? Like I can't guarantee you I'm going to find you another amazing conversion story or another, there's always the story of then we discovered that, half our users ran into this problem. It's like, well, that's great. But tell me how you're always going to discover that. Tell me how you're going to change the company so that we don't have that problem again. And so I think, the long answer, the short summary is, I think we got to start changing the process more of how things are built because we're changing how it's built with research as part of it versus research being this, sometimes thing that I feel like I can sort of ramp up and ramp down because I don't do it all the time.
Yeah, we're well said. I mean, I hear this from a whole range of product leaders and technology leaders. The general view still is in the industry that my big bets need some user research at some points in time, instead of what you're talking about, which is the well-integrated feedback loops and cycles throughout the entire product development lifecycle, all the way from ideation to into the market, and then it still continues. Right? I mean, it's never done. Software is never done. We all know that. There's always a version 2 and a version 3 and a version 4. And so, yeah, well said.
Right. Think of it. I had one engineering leader said to us one time, I added up how much one of my Scrum teams cost, one of my Agile teams. And it was something like 7 or 8 devs. You got a dev manager. I think they had 2 designers. You got a product manager. But their back in the envelope was like, it's at least $1 million, right?
One sprint.
What is a sprint team, right?
Sprint
and
team,
then it's okay. Then you add that up. It's okay. Now you can take that cost, divide it by 26 because they did 2-week sprints, right? And they said, okay, that's how much each Scrum team cost me every sprint. And they said, now on our sprints, we actually tend to have a few Scrum teams work on a sprint together. So your guess is actually right. They came back to it's about $1 million per sprint. And so they said, every time I tell the team go build this, I'm betting $1 million that this is going to move the needle. So what if research and human insight could help me make better bets? And think about that. Like that is an absolute needle mover if you're a C-level executive. I've got this limited resource, and now when I hand them something to build, I know it's going to be right. Go back even further. What about in the ideation phase? It is so much cheaper to change a drawing on a cocktail napkin or a pitch that you're presenting in Google Slides to your customers. Is this interesting to you? Than it is to change designs. It is so much cheaper to change designs than it is to change the product that you're building, right? And then we have this scenario all the time, and I hear CTOs talk about this. The worst thing is when they ship something that some of their users really like. So you ship this product, 15% of your users love this new feature. 85% are indifferent to it. Well, now I own this feature. I have to support it for forever. And most of my customers don't really care about it, right? So when you start talking to your stakeholders about research fixing that problem, always, every time, let's test every design before we're going to build it. We can score it. We can tell you how it's going to work with your different stakeholders. Now, as a C-level executive, I'm like, this is interesting to me. I can change the cost curve of my organization. I can make better bets. I can have certainty when I tell the CEO, we're going to ship this thing next week and our customers are going to love it. Because you already know. You've already put it in front of your customers. Like, they're going to love it. But that can't just be, to your point, the really big bets. That's got to be all your bets, right? You got to start saying, it's really expensive, even on small changes, to spend a sprint building something that nobody cared you built or that didn't work or people didn't like or people didn't understand. And again, you can do that now because the investment in research can scale with technology. And that's the mission we all need to be on. How do we explain that technology is an asset that helps our researchers meet that challenge? And I think, interestingly, that actually drives funding to the research teams, not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, a big aha. I was jotting down some notes, which is I have not heard very many sprint teams or pretty much anyone talk about how much does it cost for just one Scrum team for one sprint, and multiply that with 5 Scrum teams. So every 2 weeks or so, if a standard software development company is spending $1 million, that's a big bet. And wow, if someone could help reduce the risk even a little bit. I'm not even talking about identifying every single problem that exists, or it's even a small reduction in that, and all the conversation of ROI is gone. There's no need, because it's
There's an amazing stat out there. I believe it was a McKinsey study, but I can double check. That said about 50% of software dollars spent are spent on what's called rework. Just, it wasn't built right the first time. People didn't like it. They didn't understand it. It didn't work how people expected. 50%. Now imagine going to your CPO and your CTO and saying, I could save 50% of your team's cost. Or I could give you double the capacity, essentially, to build the right thing the first time. That is an incredible stat. Now imagine going to that same team and saying, by the way, while we're doing that, we can also test with a bunch of different audiences to make sure that we don't have risk. There's these horror stories in tech all the time of shipping a product and finding out that your underrepresented audience, it doesn't work for them, right? That it's either, there's something wrong with it. It doesn't work for their needs, like whatever that might be. So again, you could de-risk that aspect as well. Yeah. And you can also, while you're doing this, uncover new revenue opportunities. While we're doing all this feedback, we discovered people actually want this or this. So again, I think part of the challenge for all of us is if you work in UX, these things are sort of painfully obvious. We almost feel like they're self-explanatory. Why would you not want to do research all the time? It's so obvious. But when we get to talking to senior level executives about why they're going to spend dollars on this versus something else, if we have to find a way to take what's obvious to us and translate it to the things that matter to them. And I don't think that's, again, simply converting your last study to a dollar amount that it saved. It's explaining, I can give you productivity back. I can make the team make better bets. I imagine the customer's perception. Every time these folks ship a new version of the product or a new feature, I love it. That's what we all want, right?
Yeah.
None of us want they shipped this. This was frustrating. It was the last version was better, right? We all know those products. I think half the stuff on my phone, I feel like it's worse every time they ship an update. So like, that's the promise. And I think if we can get good at talking like that, I think leaders will be turning around saying, how do I invest in this? Because it's the best ROI I get in my product team.
Yeah. Well said, Andy. And I was, while you were speaking, I was trying to look at the book called User Tested, which Andy co-authored. And I right before this interview, I was just scanning few chapters, and it's very interesting. The process-oriented stuff, the playbook, the how human insights fit into all of this. I think you pretty much referenced a whole range of topics, and I would encourage the audience to check this book out because there's some good stories in there.
I appreciate that. Yeah, Janelle and I worked really hard on that, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, we heard a lot of great customer stories. A lot of what we tried to do was create a book that shared some inspirational stories of what people are doing, but then the back of it's almost like a little bit of a how-to manual. How do you go do some of these things? I don't think there's any right or wrong place to start, and so you can sort of go into the book and find different use cases that make sense and sort of go after them. I think my favorite part is we sort of start the book by saying, imagine working at a company where these kind of insights are fed to you. And it's not just the data, it's seeing real people going through your experiences. Imagine you're in the break room and on the TV is people going through the new marketing campaign that just launched and they're telling you what you think. Imagine on your phone, you're on the dev team and you're seeing real people responding to the new designs that are going to be put into the product. You're also maybe seeing real people responding to the current product. And the example I use to talk about this is, data is really important, but people really connect with stories. Think of how politicians operate. I mean, maybe politicians are never a good example to use, but when politicians talk about a big problem, they get up and talk about, healthcare or something, and they give you these huge numbers, trillions of dollars, and you kind of go like, I don't know what to make of that. Like, is that the right number of trillions of dollars that should cost? But what does move people is when they stop talking about the numbers and they say, let me tell you a story about a woman I met when I was in Iowa campaigning, and she has this thing, and all of us go, well, that's not right. Like, that's not how I want this to work. Companies are the same way. And what is powerful about UX research is that we can create stories that are shareable so that in the organization we can say, hey, Kuldeep, wait, did you see the story yesterday that came out about the lady who couldn't connect her Gmail to our product? And like, part of that's your team's thing and part of it's my team, but we should go fix that, right? Because that's not the experience that we want to create. I do believe most people care about what they do. They want to create a good experience. So why are so many experiences terrible? It's because people don't see people using those experiences, right? They don't see that. And so I think one of the fun parts of the book was just trying to illuminate this idea that if we can rally companies not just to data, but to narratives, I think we can really impact those experiences because, nobody goes to work every day and tells their kids, it's going to be a great day today. We're going to move the NPS from 17 to 18. Like, it's not what people do. Like, they want to create great experiences that people love using. They want to be proud of those. And I think the narratives can help people sort of align on that and sort of dive in.
Yeah, well said. So, very inspiring, Andy. One last question, because this is a question that I hear a lot, which is this applies to designers and researchers, potentially even product managers, people who have been in this 5 to 10 year that they've worked either for a large company or a small company, and they are contemplating their move into leadership. It could be people management, it could be the individual contributor path, and they're trying to figure out, hey, how do I become a leader? And they are trying to articulate what does that mean. Now, over your career, you have certainly grown into leadership positions. So any recommendations on people that are evaluating, hey, how do I become a better leader, or how do I become a leader?
Well, I think getting into leadership is pretty challenging when you first start getting to that point in your career, because often people that become leaders are maybe the best at their team on the thing that they do. And the weirdest part about becoming a first-time leader is often you don't do the thing you used to be so good at doing anymore, right? And so my CMO, Michelle Huff, talks about this article all the time that she read about how you give away your Legos, right? When you get to a certain point, you're no longer the builder. You have to start giving away your Legos, different parts of what you used to do. And so I think people that excel in leadership get good at saying, I might have been the best at doing this kind of research, whatever it is, but like what I really need now is a team that I'm helping be as good at that as I am. So you're sort of becoming a force multiplier. You're no longer the best, but you got 8 people on your team, and those 8 are becoming as good as you were at it, maybe better. And that's sort of one of your goals. I think the other thing you have to get good at when you become a leader is, again, this sort of systems thinking. Everything can't just be a one-off. You're not just operating individual projects, individual things. You're starting to think about, how does my team scale its impact, right? If I have a leader on my team and every year they come back and they've got, budget requests, things they want to go do, what I really want to know is, how are you going to be able to do even more this year than you did last year? How are you going to be able to scale your efforts and impact? And so I think if you can get good at those two things, it's both scaling your skill set into your team, but then think about, how do we as a team start to scale our impact? How do we start to be able to help more teams more quickly on more things in a repeatable way? I think that's really what a lot of leadership becomes about. And I think that's something people should think about. There are people who love the tactical job, right? They love selling, or they love writing code, or they love being a researcher, or they love doing marketing. Often being a great leader in those areas means you don't do as much of that. You get joy out of seeing your team do that at scale and do it well. And I always tell people, it doesn't mean you have to be a leader, right? We have, even here at UserTesting, we have technical job codes where people can stay in individual roles because they really like doing the thing they do. So if you love doing research and you can't imagine a day going by where you're not, talking to users and doing research, maybe you don't want to be a leader. If you think what we've been talking about here of like, how do I scale this? How do I talk to the CPO? Then you'd be a great leader, right? And neither of those is the right or wrong answer. I just think it's important that people find the right answer for them. I personally always really enjoyed being able to solve a holistic problem. I always liked in leadership. And I got a bigger piece of the problem. I had more pieces of the puzzle, and more people could help me work on this. But it meant I was less critical, frankly, to all those problems as you get more and more senior. And I think that's something you sort of have to get used to.
Yeah. Wow. Very inspirational, Andy. Thank you so much. There's just, I have so many notes written down here that even though I've heard you speak multiple times before, I learned so many new things that I'm sure the audience, the listeners will be super jazzed and happy. So thank you.
Well, there's a lot to talk about here. So as this goes live, I'm happy to join the conversation online, whether on LinkedIn or anywhere else. These were great questions. It was really fun getting to see you and talk about this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy. Thank you to all the listeners. Please stay tuned and join this conversation. And this episode will be available where all podcasts are available. See you all.
That's a wrap for UX Ignite. Keep the UX fire burning. Subscribe, share, and stay inspired. Until next time, ignite your research journey.